We had AK-47s put to our heads, and I was begging. I was just saying, like, please don't shoot me. And they started carrying me away, and I remember screaming and saying, please don't rape me. My name is Lynsey Addario, and I am a conflict photographer, and I have photographed primarily in the Middle East and Africa, but really have photographed all over the world. This is my series of photographs from Libya. I was there covering the beginning of the Arab Spring from February of 2011 through March, when I was kidnapped by a loyalist to Gaddafi. So I went into Libya, and some of the first scenes I saw were these incredible scenes of euphoria, where there were men and women, children, young, a lot of young people demonstrating in the streets and sort of celebrating already the overthrow of Gaddafi. This is a street scene in Benghazi in the evening. Benghazi was really the center of the uprising in eastern Libya. One thing that I recognized before the fall of a government was the chaos. Things that happen routinely, like garbage collection, cleaning the streets, mail delivery, things that happen in places just stop. And it just immediately reminded me of those initial days of the fall of the Taliban, also the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and just really those scenes of chaos and uncertainty of what would come next. Very shortly after, there was a call to arms. They called together all of the men of fighting age and basically asked for volunteers to go fight against Gaddafi's troops. They made their way toward Tripoli along the one highway that cut through the desert. So we as journalists made our way with them, and we ended up basically living along the front line for a good few weeks. And so that's what you're looking at. This is them in one of their vehicles with the flag and just moving forward. There were days where Gaddafi's troops took more ground toward the east, and then there were days where the rebels took more ground toward the west. Clearly, they're in a moment of sort of celebration. They feel like they're taking ground. You can tell by the way they're raising flags and doing the victory sign in the background. One of the tactics they were using is burning tires in order to obscure the vision from above. And you can see from back here. It was exhausting. I mean, we spent weeks on the front line. We did not have tents. We didn't even have flak jackets because we had no idea we were going to cover such heavy combat. At that point, the fighting was getting closer and closer, and so most of my colleagues decided to go back to Benghazi. And as the front line kept shifting, we saw more and more soldiers wounded and killed. And so one of the things about war is it's very hard to understand the death toll unless you actually go and count or witness the amount of dead. So it sounds crazy, but we often went to the morgues and to the hospitals to get a sense of how many people were dying. We saw a lot of soldiers were getting killed, and this is in one of the scenes there. Very sensitive moments for a photographer because these are all fighters, and this is obviously one of their friends and comrades. I've seen this face in Afghanistan, I've seen this face in so many of the conflicts I've covered, that every one of these men were thinking, this could have been me. This guy here, he's clearly sort of asking himself a question. He's got blood on his hands. That's something that, maybe he was one of the guys who carried him here. I wonder how many of these men survived because the fighting continued long after I left. At this point, I had been covering the front line for about 2 weeks. I was exhausted, and I knew I needed to kind of step back from the front line, and it was the next day that we were taken hostage. That morning, we woke up to pretty heavy mortar rounds near the house. So I was just ready to go back to Benghazi, but we went to the front line to see what was happening, and I was sort of paralyzed by my fear. And at that point, we started seeing civilians fleeing out of Ajdabiya. The fighting was very heavy. And then finally, we decided to leave and go back east, which we thought was safe. At that point, Gaddafi's troops had actually flanked the desert and cut the road in front of us. All of my colleagues got pulled out of the car, and me as the only woman, I was just sort of left sitting in the back seat. I decided to make a run for it. Immediately, there was a soldier on me, grabbing at me, and I was having this sort of fight with him in the middle of the street while bullets were literally like zoom, zoom, And then I ran for this stone building, and it was like a police checkpoint building. And all my colleagues were there, and we had AK-47s put to our heads. And I was begging, I was just saying, like, please don't shoot me. They picked me up by my sort of shoulders and my ankles, and they started carrying me away. And I remember screaming and saying, please don't rape me. And over the course of a week, we were blindfolded, tied up, beaten up. One of the guys, he had a gun to me, and then he was sort of caressing my hair and saying, you're going to die tonight, over and over. And it just kind of went on. I mean, this went on for days, and eventually ended up in Tripoli, where we spent another 3 days while our release was negotiated. It's hard to believe these photos are like 10 years to the day. Usually I have this sort of rule that when something happens, I go back so I can sort of process my trauma. But in Libya, I haven't been back because it's almost like Russian roulette doing this job, that you can only tempt fate so many times.